What's up, y'all? Couple things. One, I got the windows open in this trailer, so it's gonna be kind of loud. Second thing, I haven't shaved in a couple days, so I know it looked pretty rough. I'm gonna do something a little bit different today. I frequently read to my best friend, and this article I'm actually gonna record for him. But I think this is something that you might find interesting. It's an editorial that ran in the December issue, last December 2018 issue of National Geographic, and it's talking about well, I guess there's several subjects, but it's talking about overpopulation, and I want to read it first. I'll give you some thoughts on it afterwards if there's enough time. If not, I'll just make it another video. But this editorial is, of course, written from a Eurocentric point of view, meaning it's written for the point of view of a European or Westerner, someone from the United States, Europe, Australia. Something that we don't realize, I think, and many people don't realize, that depending on what extreme you are when it comes to socio-political issues, some people call it white superiority, white supremacy. Some people call it Westernism, Westernism, modern centrism, or whatever it's called. The bottom line is there is a war between the haves and the have-nots. There's a war between the former colonial powers and the former colonies, the so-called developed nations versus the underdeveloped nations, or the third world nations, which is actually an insult to use. And what this thing is talking about is their idea of the end of the world, or you know what I mean, the decline of man. And to them, the decline of man means the developed nations get more prosperity. And if you have the wrong mindset, which is what many in the Western world do, you feel that that's going to infringe on your benefit. So, for example, Dick Cheney said something to the effect of, the Western way of life is non-negotiable. George Bush said, George Bush, talking about W, George Bush said, you're either with us or you're against us. George Bush's daddy said, he mentions a new world order. And what all of this is ultimately saying, and then of course Americans always say they're jealous of us on our way of life. And I did say I was going to say this after the article, didn't I? Okay, but the final thing is that the Western powers, who once colonized and enslaved the rest of the world, or as much of the world as they could, and it basically debowed everything that they could to build up their society, they are now the they're now the haves, and the ones they took from are the have-nots. Because I hope you don't believe for a second that Africa is a poor continent. It is not. There's no such thing as a poor continent. Even the most barren lands on the planet are rich in resources. So there's such thing as poor people, but not poor continent or poor countries. So where do poor people come from? Poor people are created. They're created by, someone coming in and obstructing their way of life. Someone coming in and suppressing them from being able to provide for their families, provide for themselves. Someone going into a land and stripping it of its resources to the detriment of the people who live there. Poisoning water sources, destroying deforestation, killing off wildlife, things like that. Poverty is a man-made weapon. It's a man-made state. There are no people on earth who who are suffering famine other than through the actions of another people. Okay, so never forget that. There's no such thing as a shithole country. There are countries that are left to shit when a larger, well, I wouldn't say a larger, a more powerful group come in and they rob those people of the ability to live a dignified life. But there's no such thing as a country that's a shithole. Okay, if you want to talk about resources, England is a shithole. France is a shithole. Spain is a shithole. Why is that? Those are countries that if not for the wealth of other people, they would be poor countries. They are people that are poor on natural resources. They cannot grow. They can't produce a lot of vegetation. They can't produce a lot of agriculture. They have to turn to another land. They have to turn to another group of people to sustain themselves. And if you want to me, that's a shithole. Okay, but if this guy has fruit, vegetables, animals, and I take them from him and leave him with nothing, how arrogant of me to say that he's poor when I'm the one that took his resources. You get it? Okay. The second thing is the mindset of many Westerners that there's not enough resources on this planet for all of us. And you'll hear that when I read this article. They call that a poverty mindset, or what is that? Not abundance mindset. The opposite of abundance mindset, scarcity mindset. These are people who think that there's not enough for both of us, so the only way I'm going to eat is to take from you. That is one of the problems with this trickle-down theory that we have here in America, that the rich have convinced the poor that the more I have, the better it is for you. Sounds like a multi-level marketing scheme, don't it? That's the same shit that the churches tell people. The more money you give me, the better it is for you. In the meantime, all you guys are poor. And it must be because you're not praying hard enough, or you're not tithing hard enough, or you're just lazy, or God has cursed you. Things like that. The government says the same thing, that the more money that the wealthy have, the better it is for people at the bottom of the barrel. And we already know that not to be true. The depression of the stock market crash in 1919, 1920 is proof of that. The Great Depression didn't occur because there were no jobs. The Great Depression didn't occur because there was no money. The Great Depression occurred because most of the wealth was hoarded at the top. There were abundance of jobs, but those jobs didn't pay people enough money to boost the economy. People had to choose between food, shelter, and going to the department store. The department stores were losing sales because people didn't have enough money. Not that they didn't have money, not that they didn't have jobs. They had jobs, but they weren't spending it with the wealthy. And the wealthy started to lose their money. The department stores are losing money. Real estate was losing money. Everybody's losing money because the poor were not spending. And that's what happened in just about 10, 12 years ago right here in this country with the housing crisis. It wasn't that there was no housing. It wasn't that people didn't have money. It was just that the economy had gotten to the point that people stopped spending money. That's the reason why your fearless leader, George Bush, right after that, he said, go shopping. Black Friday, it's Christmas time, it's Thanksgiving time. Get out there and spend money. Why was that? Because the wealthy weren't making any money off the poor because the poor weren't spending. You get it? So economies don't trickle down, economies trickle up. Okay, so that's that pimp mentality. That bitch, give me your money. The more money I have, the better it is for you. You know what I mean? Hopefully y'all ain't stupid enough to believe that shit. But in this country, they do believe that. And then, anyway, I could go on for days. So let me get into this article. It's going to be a little long, okay? Yeah, I might not have enough time. I might have done all my talking just now, so glasses. Okay, so the column is called Embark. It's an op-ed opinion piece in National Geographic magazine. This is the cover. Title is The Global Peril of Inequality. Author's name Jared Diamond. The world's richest countries, such as Luxembourg and the United States, have average incomes per person about 100 times higher than in the poorest countries such as Burundi and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's a tragedy for poor countries. Is it also a looming tragedy for the rich ones? Let me say this. The Congo, we think of that as a poor country. Do you realize the Congo is the only source of an element that we need in our cell phones? The only source. There's a way to get it by processing it, and the only source for that is in Australia. But Australia closed up all their mines because we had depleted their resources. The Congo, if their government was allowed to sell this element, they were allowed to sell this metal, would be one of the richest. They would be the Saudi Arabia of Africa. But because the powers that be take it, the Congo, oh my God, there's only 21 minutes left on this thing? Jesus Christ. Okay, let me keep going. Until recently, all those poor countries elsewhere were no threat to rich countries. They, out there, didn't know that much about our lifestyle. And even if they did and became angry, they couldn't do anything about it. But today, poor remote countries are able to create problems for rich ones, and the reasons can be summed up in a word: globalization. As a result of the increased connections among parts of the world, people in developing countries know more about the differences in living standards, and many of them can now travel to the rich countries. Globalization has made it untenable for such dramatic inequalities between high and low living standards to persist. I see evidence of that everywhere, but three examples stand out. The first, health. The spread of disease is an unintended result of globalization. Feared diseases now get carried off to rich countries by travelers from poor countries, where the diseases are endemic and the public health measures are weak. The diseases include old ones like cholera and flu, plus new ones like AIDS, Ebola, and Marburg. For instance, in 1992, when an Argentine airliner picked up cholera-infected food in Peru and flew nonstop to Los Angeles, some passengers then flew on to Seattle, Alaska, and Tokyo, resulting in a trail of cholera cases from California to Japan. The second, terrorism. Global inequality itself isn't the direct cause of terrorist acts. Religious fundamentalism and individual psychopathology play essential roles. Every country has its crazy, angry individuals driven to kill. Poor countries have no monopoly on them. But in poor countries today, people are barraged with media visions of lifestyles that are available elsewhere in the world and unavailable to them. In anger and desperation, become terrorists themselves. Others tolerate or support terrorists. That is bullshit. First of all, what it's ignoring is the role that the former colonizers play in creating terrorism. There would be no terrorism if there hadn't been first colonialism. They have no reason to be angry at the developing world unless we're the ones who created the poverty that they're undergoing, the government instability that they're living under. So that is bullshit. That is a completely a European's point of view. Europeans' view of it. They're basically what it's saying is they're jealous of us because we live better than them, and that's bullshit. Anyway, since the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the Pentagon and New York City World Trade Center towers, it's been clear that the oceans that formerly protected the United States no longer do. Americans can now live under constant threat of global terrorism. I predict that there will be more terrorist attacks against the United States, Europe, Japan, and Australia as long as big differences in standing living standards persist. Again, I'm going to say this. It has nothing to do with living standards. It all has to do with us creating the instability and the poverty and the resentment that they're feeling. Has nothing to do with religion. Religion is just a place where people turn for their leaders. They have political leaders, they have religious leaders. We have them in this country. You know what I'm saying? The church, the place of worship, is the gathering place. It is the one place every week, no matter what group of people you are on this planet, that you're gathered with the majority of people who live in your community. There's no other place that everyone else comes together under one roof and listens to one person. Okay, so religion ain't got shit to do with it. Anyway, the third result when inequality and globalization collide is that people with Spartan lifestyles want affluent ones. In the most developing countries, increasing living standards is a top policy goal. But millions of people in those countries won't wait to see whether their government can deliver higher standards of living within their lifetimes. Instead, they seek more affluent lifestyles now by immigrating to developing countries, with or without visas, especially to Western Europe, the United States, and Australia, especially from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Whether immigrants are seeking economic opportunity, you mean like the Pilgrims? Fuck out of here. A haven from violence or political asylum, it's proving impossible to control recent waves of migration around the world. It won't be possible for everyone to achieve the dream of the developed world lifestyle. Just do the math, and here's where we get the scarcity mindset. The average consumption rate per person means the amount of oils and other resources that the average person consumes a year. In rich countries, those rates are up 30 times as high as they are in poor countries. Multiply, that just means we're wasteful, that's all. And then our technology uses a lot of resources that theirs don't. Anyway, multiply each country's current population by its average per person consumption rate for a resource, say oil, and add up those amounts over the whole world. The resulting sum is the world's current consumption rate of that resource. Now repeat the calculation, but with all developing countries achieving consumption rates up to 30 times as high as their current ones. The result, world consumption rates increase about tenfold. That's equivalent to a world population of nearly 80 billion people with the current distribution of consumption rates. Some optimists claim that the world can support 9.5 billion people, but no optimist is crazy enough to claim that the world can support the equivalent of 80 billion. What he's saying is, the more you have, the less I have. So in order for me to keep what I've got to keep you from getting it. And you know what? We're coming up on 18 minutes, so I'm going to end this. I'm going to finish this in another video, and we'll be back.